Welcome back to U.S. Government Explained, the podcast where we break down American government in simple, clear English. Today, we're talking about something at the heart of American democracy: elections and voting. How do elections work? Why are there so many of them? And why does it sometimes feel so complicated? By the end of this episode, you'll understand where U.S. elections come from, how they work at every level, and how Americans actually vote today. Let's get started. Elections are the main way Americans choose the people who make decisions about everything from taxes and schools to foreign policy and the environment. Elections are how the United States turns the idea of government by the people into a real system. And unlike some countries where national elections happen every few years, the U.S. has constant elections, local, state, and federal, all happening on different schedules. It really never stops. The U.S. Constitution creates a system called federalism. We've gone over this many times, but it divides power between the national government and the states. This means elections also happen at multiple levels. Federal elections for the president, senators, and representatives. State elections for governors, state senators, and state representatives. And local elections for mayors, city councils, sheriffs, school boards. In fact, most of the rules for how elections work, like registration, voting machines, polling places, are decided by states per the Constitution, not the federal government. That's why the voting process can look very different depending on where you live. Presidential elections are long, very long, and only getting longer. Sometimes the process feels like it lasts 2 full years. But here's the basic cycle. Step 1 has to do with primaries and caucuses. Before the general election, each political party, Democrats and Republicans, needs to choose its nominee. Primaries are regular elections where people vote privately. Caucuses are community meetings where people discuss and vote publicly. Different states vote on different dates. 2 states, Iowa and New Hampshire, traditionally vote first, which gives them a lot of influence, being the initial deciders of each party's candidate. Then comes Super Tuesday, when many states vote at the same time. Each state has a chance to vote, but usually there becomes a pretty clear frontrunner as the states finalize their primaries. Step 2, national conventions. Each party holds a big convention where delegates officially nominate the candidate. It's part celebration, part political show, and part formal decision-making. Step 3 is the general election. This is the part most people know: the big campaign, the political ads, the debates, and finally Election Day on the first Tuesday in November. And step 4, the Electoral College. The United States does not choose the president by a simple nationwide popular vote. The last 20 years would look quite different if we did. Instead, it uses the Electoral College, a system created in the Constitution. Here's the short explanation. Each state gets a certain number of electoral votes based on its population, but that also coincides with its number of members of Congress. Whoever wins the popular vote in a state usually gets all of that state's electoral votes. To win the presidency, a candidate needs 270 electoral votes. This is why someone can win the national popular vote but still lose the election. It has happened several times in U.S. history. Most recently, it happened in 2000 and in 2016. Next, we have congressional elections. Congress is made up of 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the House, members serve 2-year terms. That means every seat is up for election every 2 years. In the Senate, senators serve 6-year terms. So every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is elected. Because of this, elections held halfway through a president's term, like we have coming up in 2026, also known as the midterm elections, can dramatically shift the balance of power in Congress. Next, we have state and local elections. Many Americans don't realize how much state and local governments affect daily life, like public schools, policing and safety, roads and public transportation, property taxes, local laws and regulations. These elections often happen in odd-numbered years, or on dates other than November, which can lead to very low voter turnout, even though the results are important. The story of voting rights in the United States is a long one. In early America, at first, voting was limited mostly to white Christian men who owned property. After the Civil War, 3 constitutional amendments changed things. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment defined citizenship as any person born in the United States or to citizens. And the 15th Amendment prohibited denying voting rights based on race. In theory, these amendments gave Black men the right to vote. In reality, states, especially in the South, used poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, and violence to prevent them from voting. Women gained the right to vote in 1920 with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. And in the 1950s and 1960s, civil rights activists fought against discriminatory voting laws. This led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protected minority voters and banned many forms of voter suppression. This was a major turning point, and it fundamentally reshaped American politics. Today, debates continue over several voting-related issues, many of them focused on how easy or difficult it is for people to vote. One major issue is voter ID laws. Some states require specific types of identification to vote. Supporters say this prevents fraud. Critics argue that it makes voting harder or more expensive for people who don't have those IDs, such as elderly voters, low-income voters, or students. Another group of issues involves access to voting. For example, limiting early voting days, restricting mail-in voting, or closing polling places in certain neighborhoods. These changes often affect rural communities, minority communities, and people who cannot take time off work. But one of the biggest and most complicated modern issues is gerrymandering. This is something that is at the forefront of political debates today, and is something to pay close attention to in the lead-up to the midterm elections next year. Gerrymandering happens when politicians draw voting district boundaries in a way that gives their own party a long-term advantage. Instead of districts representing communities, the lines are shaped to include or exclude certain voters. For example, a district might be drawn to pack many voters of one party into a single district, so the other party can win more districts overall. Or the opposite approach is used, spreading a group of voters thinly across many districts so they cannot form a majority anywhere. This is often seen when it comes to large cities, which often vote blue, but are located within red states. Because the U.S. House of Representatives and many state legislatures rely on district-based elections, gerrymandering can strongly influence which party stays in power, sometimes even when that party receives fewer votes overall. That's why gerrymandering is such a major debate today, and why many states and courts are still deciding how to handle it. The U.S. does not have automatic voter registration. Most Americans must register themselves, usually online or at a government office. Once registered, people can vote in different ways. The traditional method on Election Day is to go to your assigned polling place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. There's also early in-person voting. Many states let you vote in the weeks before Election Day by going to a government office or polling place. And finally, there's mail-in and absentee voting. Every state has some form of mail voting. Some states send a ballot to every voter. Others require a request. Personally, since I live in Denmark, I am still able to vote in statewide and national elections. I do have to request my absentee ballot each election cycle, and that ballot is emailed to me. I print it out, I fill it in, I have to sign a signature that gets matched with other signatures on file, and then I mail it in. And that depends which postal service I find most reliable at the time. I can track my ballot's location on the State of Michigan website, which is pretty cool. I can see if my ballot has been sent. If I haven't received it, I can ask what's going on. They can send a replacement, and I can see when it has been received and counted by the state. Compared to many countries, voter turnout in the United States is relatively low. Reasons include complicated registration rules, voting on a weekday, long lines at polling places, confusing or changing state rules, lack of trust in government, and feeling that one vote won't make a difference. But turnout is improving among younger voters and new citizens, especially in major election years. And recent elections have shown that we are becoming more and more divided as a population, and that means so many of our elections are being decided by just thousands of votes, hundreds of votes, and that each vote really does make a difference. U.S. elections use many security measures to prevent election fraud. There are things like paper ballots or paper backups in case voting machines fail, bipartisan poll workers who have to enforce certain rules, like you cannot wear political propaganda within a voting place, and you can be turned away and asked to remove those articles of clothing. There are secure counting machines, and there are audits and recounts when requested, or if a vote is very, very close. Despite claims of widespread fraud, multiple studies and court cases have found no evidence of large-scale voter fraud in modern U.S. elections. One of the most important traditions in American democracy is the peaceful transfer of power, which has been respected for most of the country's history. So why do elections matter? Well, if you haven't figured it out, elections decide how much you pay in taxes, how your schools are funded, what healthcare costs, how immigration laws are enforced, how cities grow, what rights are protected. In other words, elections shape the world you live in every day. Now I've got a question for you. What part of the U.S. election system surprised you the most? And how does it compare to elections in your home country? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening to U.S. Government Explained. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or leave a review. It helps us reach more learners around the world. Bye!